Reading from Palmer, Let Your Life Speak. This is Chapter 3, When Way Closes, Part 2, Learning Our Limits. But that truth does not go deep enough, not if I am to discover the meaning of way closing behind me. I was fired because that job had little or nothing to do with who I am, with my true nature and gifts, with what I care and do not care about. My resort to adolescent rebellion reflected that simple fact. I apologize belatedly for my immaturity, for the grief I gave my supervisor, and for whatever damage I may have done to the data. None of that is to my credit. But I was laughing to keep myself sane. Perhaps the research I was doing was what a good sociologist ought to do, but it felt meaningless to me, and I felt fraudulent doing it. Those feelings were harbingers of things to come, things that eventually led me out of the profession altogether. Obviously, I should have dealt with my feelings more directly and exercised more self-control. Either I should have quit that job under my own steam or settled in and done the work properly. But sometimes the shoulds do not work because the life one is living runs crosswise to the grain of one's soul. At that time in my life, I had no feeling for the grain of my soul, and no sense of which way was crosswise. Not knowing what was driving me, I behaved with blind but blissful unconsciousness, and reality responded by giving me a big and hard-to-take clue about who I am, way closed behind me. Neither that job nor any job like it was in the cards for me, given the hand I was dealt at birth. That may sound like sinfully fatalistic thinking, or worse, a self-serving excuse. But I believe it embodies a simple, healthy, and life-giving truth about vocation. Each of us arrives here with a nature, which means both limits and potentials. We can learn as much about our nature by running into our limits as by experiencing our potentials. That, I think, is what Ruth and life were trying to teach me. It would be nice if our limits did not reveal themselves in such embarrassing ways as getting fired from a job. But if you are like me and don't readily admit your limits, embarrassment may be the only way to get your attention. I go on full alert only when I am blocked or derailed or flat out fail. Then, finally, I may be forced to face my nature and find out whether I can make something of both my gifts and my limitations. It is important to distinguish between two kinds of limitations, those that come with selfhood and those that are imposed by people or political forces hell-bent on keeping us, quote, in our place, end quote. I do not ask everyone who gets fired to conclude that it was the work of a gracious God offering clues to one's true vocation. Sometimes it is the work of a pathological boss or a corporate culture, getting rid of people whose propensity for truth-telling threatens the status quo. Sometimes it is the result of an economic system that robs the poor of their jobs so that the rich can get richer still. Like everything else in the spiritual life, getting guidance from way closing requires thoughtful discernment. Our problem as Americans, at least among my race and gender, is that we resist the very idea of limits, regarding limits of all sorts as temporary and regrettable impositions on our lives. Our national myth is about the endless defiance of limits, opening the western frontier, breaking the speed of sound, dropping people on the moon, discovering cyberspace at the very moment when we have filled old-fashioned space with so much junk that we can barely move. We refuse to take no for an answer. Part of me treasures the hopefulness of this American legacy, but when I consistently refuse to take no for an answer, I miss the vital clues to my identity that arise when way closes, and I am more likely both to exceed my limits and to do harm to others in the process. A few years ago, I was introduced at a conference as a recovering sociologist. That line got a good laugh, but it also snapped me back to my ignominious failure in the summer before I began graduate school. My soul needed to recover from the misfit between sociology and itself. But before that could happen, my ego needed to deal with its shame. I had to get through graduate school and prove, however briefly, that I could succeed as a professor of sociology, even though that path took me directly into vocational despair. The despair that took me from teaching sociology at Georgetown to the community at Pendle Hill contained a call to vocational integrity. Had I not followed my despair, had Ruth not helped me understand it, I might have continued to pursue a work that was not mine to do, causing further harm to myself, to the people and projects with which I worked, and to a profession that is well worth doing by those who are called to do it.